I never believed one teacher could change the entire course of a student's life. Until I met her. At first, she was just another face in the classroom, strict with rules, and always pushing us harder than we thought we could go. But behind her lessons was something deeper, guidance that reached far beyond textbooks. I was just a lost student, carrying burdens no one else could see. What she did for me turned my darkest days into a turning point I never expected. When I think back to my school days, I don't remember them as bright or carefree. For most students, those years are filled with friends, laughter, and small adventures. For me, they were heavy. Every morning felt like dragging myself into a place where I didn't belong. I wasn't the best student, not because I didn't care, but because life outside of school weighed me down in ways no one could see. Home, things were always complicated. My parents fought constantly about money. Bills piled up, and silence often hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. My father worked long hours but came home tired, frustrated, and short-tempered. My mother, although loving in her way, carried her own sadness, and sometimes her emotions spilled over onto me. I didn't grow up with the kind of encouragement or stability that other kids seem to take for granted. So when I walked through the school gates each day, I carried all of that inside me. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, and tried to slip through the halls without being noticed. Teachers often marked me as lazy or unmotivated. I could see the disappointment in their eyes when they looked at my unfinished homework or my poor grades. Some even stopped expecting anything from me at all. And in a strange way, that was easier. If they didn't expect much, I didn't have to face the shame of failing again. But inside, I longed for something different. I wanted someone to see me not just as another struggling student, but as a person who was trying, even if I was failing most of the time. I wanted someone to believe that I had more in me than the version of myself I showed to the world. Still, I didn't dare hope for it. Then, in my second year of high school, everything shifted. A new teacher arrived at the school. Her name was Ms. Carter. On the first day she walked into our classroom, I remember how the air seemed to change. She was not young but not old either. Her presence carried both warmth and authority. She had a way of standing tall, her voice calm yet commanding, and when she spoke, it felt as if every word mattered. Unlike other teachers who dive straight into lessons or routine, she began with something different. She told us about herself, about how she had once been a struggling student too, sitting at the back of the class, convinced she wasn't good enough. She shared how a single teacher changed her path, and how that moment made her choose to become an educator. I don't know about my classmates, but for me, her words pierced through the walls I had built around myself. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The faint spark of hope. Ms. Carter noticed everything. The first week, she observed each of us closely, not just our test scores but how we acted, how we carried ourselves, who we sat with, and what we avoided. She never called me out in front of the class, but I could feel her eyes on me when I slouched in my seat or stared at the floor. She didn't scold me, instead, she waited for the right moment. One afternoon after class, she asked me to stay back. My heart pounded. I was sure she was going to lecture me about my grades. But instead, she asked something simple. "How are you doing?" The question caught me off guard. Most teachers only cared about assignments, deadlines, and marks. No one asked about me. I shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I'm fine," I mumbled. But she didn't accept that answer. She leaned forward slightly, her tone softer. "You don't have to tell me everything now, but I want you to know. See you. And I believe you're capable of more than you think." Those words lodged themselves deep in my mind. No one had said that to me before. Not at home. Not at school. Certainly not to someone who had failed more times than succeeded. In the weeks that followed, I found myself paying more attention in her class. At first, it wasn't because I cared about the subject, it was because I cared about how she looked at me. She had this way of making you feel that your answer mattered, even if it was wrong. She never mocked mistakes. Instead, she used them as stepping stones. Slowly, I started participating. At first, it was just a few words, whispered answers barely above a murmur. But she always acknowledged them with a smile or a nod, like they were the most important contributions. That acknowledgement lit something inside me. Outside of class, my life didn't magically get easier. My parents still argued, and I still carried the weight of that environment. But for those 45 minutes in Ms. Carter's classroom, I felt lighter. It was as if I was seen not as the boy with problems but as a student with potential. One day, she gave us an essay assignment. Write about someone who inspires you. Most of my classmates rolled their eyes, treating it like just another task. But for me it became something more. I sat at my desk that night, pen in hand, staring at the blank paper. For the first time I wanted to write. I wanted to pour out the feelings I couldn't say out loud. When I turned in the essay, my hands shook. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was honest. A few days later, when Ms. Carter returned our papers, she slipped mine face down onto my desk with a small note clipped to it. Later, when I read it, I felt my chest tighten. She had written, "You have a voice worth hearing. Don't hide it. Keep writing." Those simple words gave me a sense of worth I had never known. And though I didn't realize it at the time, that was the beginning of everything. The moment when my story, and the role Ms. Carter would play in it, truly began. From that essay onwards, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change all at once, but a slow, steady climb out of the shadows I had been hiding in. Every day in Ms. Carter's class became more than just a lesson. It became a place where I felt safe, a rare pocket of belonging in a life otherwise filled with noise and confusion. The other students noticed it too. They would tease me sometimes, saying things like, "Wow, you actually talk in class now," or "Careful, he might become teacher's pet." Their words stung, but not enough to push me back into silence. Because for once, I wasn't invisible, and I didn't want to go back to being a ghost in my own story. Ms. Carter had a unique way of teaching. She didn't just throw information at us and expect us to absorb it. She connected lessons to life. When she taught literature, she asked us not only to analyze characters but to compare them to our own struggles. When she explained history, she told stories of ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. It was as if every subject she touched carried a deeper meaning. One afternoon, she introduced us to a short story about resilience. The protagonist was a young man who had faced poverty, rejection, and loss, but who kept going because he believed in something greater. As she read the passage aloud, I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. It was as though she had chosen that story just for me. And maybe, in her quiet, intentional way, she had. After class that day, she stopped me again. "You seemed very thoughtful during today's reading," she said. I hesitated before replying. "It felt familiar," I admitted, though my voice cracked slightly. She gave me a knowing smile. That's the beauty of stories. They remind us we're not alone, even when we feel like we are. Those words stayed with me. For so long, I had carried my burdens in silence, believing no one could understand. But slowly, through her lessons, I began to see that struggle was part of the human story, and that maybe mine wasn't as hopeless as I had convinced myself. Home, things didn't improve. My parents' arguments grew louder, sometimes erupting into long nights of shouting that kept me awake until dawn. On those mornings, I would drag myself to school with heavy eyes and a heavier heart. But Miss Carter noticed. She always noticed. One morning, after I stumbled into class late and exhausted, she didn't scold me like other teachers would have. Instead, after everyone else left for lunch, she quietly asked, "Did you sleep at all last night?" I stared at the floor, embarrassed. "Not much," I confessed. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to explain everything. Just know that you have someone in your corner." That moment broke something in me. I wasn't used to kindness without conditions. I wasn't used to someone offering support without expecting anything back. It was overwhelming, but it also gave me strength. As weeks turned into months, I started working harder, not just for myself, but because I didn't want to disappoint her. When I stumbled, she didn't let me give up. If I failed a test, she sat with me to go over my mistakes. If I skipped an assignment, she reminded me firmly, "Your voice matters and your work shows it. Don't silence yourself." And slowly my grades improved. They weren't perfect, but they were no longer at the bottom. For the first time I saw progress. And with progress came a fragile thread of confidence. But even as things brightened in school, the shadows outside grew darker. One evening, after another explosive fight between my parents, I stormed out of the house and wandered aimlessly through the streets. I ended up at the library, one of the few quiet places I knew. To my surprise, Miss Carter was there, grading papers at a corner table. She looked up, startled at first, then concerned. "What are you doing here so late?" I froze, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to lie, to brush it off. But something about her gaze, the way it held both firmness and gentleness, broke down my defenses. For the first time I told someone the truth. I told her about the fights, the sleepless nights, the way I felt caught in the middle of a home that never felt safe. She listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging. When I finished, she didn't offer empty promises or say everything would magically be okay. Instead, she said something that struck deeper than anything else. You're carrying a weight no student should have to carry. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Her words felt like a lifeline. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed to hear them until that moment. From then on, Ms. Carter became more than a teacher. She became a mentor, a guide, almost like a second parent in the ways I had always wished for. She encouraged me to join after-school activities, to find outlets for my emotions instead of bottling them up. She pushed me to write more, to channel my pain into stories, essays, even poems. And each time I shared my writing, she responded with care. "This is powerful," she'd say. "Don't underestimate the strength in your words." For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't just surviving, I was beginning to live. Still, life wasn't without cracks. The more she believed in me, the more pressure I felt to rise to her expectations. And though I wanted to, a voice inside me whispered doubts. What if she realized I wasn't as strong as she thought? What if, in the end, I let her down like everyone else? Those questions lingered in the back of my mind, like storm clouds waiting to break. But Miss Carter's belief in me kept pushing me forward. Step by step, assignment by assignment, conversation by conversation, she was building me into someone I never thought I could become. And though I couldn't see it clearly then, those changes were only the beginning. Because the hardest trials, the ones that would truly test everything she had taught me, were still ahead. The school year moved forward, each day carrying its own challenges, but also its quiet victories. With Ms. Carter guiding me, I began to feel like I was no longer just drifting through my days. Instead, I was slowly carving out a path, one step at a time. She had this uncanny ability to turn ordinary moments into lessons. A failed quiz became a chance to learn perseverance. Class debate became a stage to find my voice. Even a small assignment carried weight because she treated every effort as valuable. I still remember one morning when she returned a short story I had written. Instead of just giving me a grade, she had written detailed comments in the margins, praising what worked and suggesting how to improve. At the end, she wrote, "This is not just schoolwork. This is a piece of you. And it's worth sharing." I stared at that note for a long time, my chest tightening. For so long, I had believed that my words, my thoughts, didn't matter. But she saw value in them, and in me. That single belief made me start believing too, little by little. Outside the classroom, I tried to carry myself differently. I still had my struggles at home, but in school I held my head a little higher. When classmates teased me, I brushed it off more easily. When they laughed during presentations, I didn't shrink back as much. And when Ms. Carter looked at me with that calm, steady gaze, I felt like I could take on more than I ever thought possible. But with growth came pressure. As my grades improved, other teachers started to notice. Some praised me, surprised at the turnaround. Others seemed skeptical, as if waiting for me to slip back into old habits. And my classmates, they didn't all celebrate the change. Few grew resentful. One boy in particular, Daniel, began mocking me openly, saying things like, "Oh, look, Ms. Carter's little favorite." Those words hurt more than I wanted to admit. I tried to laugh them off, but inside I worried. Was that how everyone saw me? Was I only improving because of Ms. Carter's support? What would happen if she wasn't there? One day, after Daniel's jeering had gone too far, I nearly walked out of class. My hands shook with anger and humiliation. But before I could leave, Ms. Carter called my name. The room went silent. I expected her to scold me for reacting, but instead she addressed the class. "Respect is not optional here," she said firmly. "Every student deserves the right to grow without being mocked for it." Her words cut through the air, and Daniel went quiet. She didn't call him out by name, but the message was clear. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just protecting me. She was teaching all of us something larger. That kindness and respect mattered just as much as academics. After class, she pulled me aside. "You don't need to prove yourself to anyone who tries to tear you down," she told me. "The only person you need to prove something to is yourself." That advice settled deep in my chest. I carried it with me, replaying it on the days when doubt crept in. As time passed, I grew closer to Ms. Carter, not in a way that crossed boundaries, but in the way a mentor and student do when trust is built carefully, piece by piece. She became the person I could confide in when home life became unbearable. And she never pushed too hard. She always let me share at my own pace. But her influence wasn't only about comfort. She challenged me too. She pushed me to apply for a school writing contest, something I never would have dared to attempt on my own. At first, I resisted. "I'll never win," I told her. "It's not about winning," she replied with a smile. "It's about stepping into the arena. You've hidden your voice for too long. It's time to let it be heard." Her confidence in me was unwavering, even when mine faltered. So, reluctantly, I submitted a piece. And though I didn't win first place, I received an honorable mention. When my name was read aloud at the assembly, a wave of pride washed over me. For once, I wasn't invisible. That night at home, I allowed myself a rare smile. My parents didn't notice. They were too wrapped up in their own conflicts, but I didn't care, because I knew that somewhere someone believed in me. And that belief was becoming enough to keep me going. But life has a way of testing us just when we think we're finally finding our footing. One afternoon, I walked into Ms. Carter's classroom to find her looking unusually tired. Her usually steady voice cracked slightly as she spoke, and she seemed distracted, almost burdened by something unseen. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes the way it usually did. At first, I ignored it, convincing myself she was just having a bad day. But as weeks passed, I noticed it more often. She would pause in the middle of lessons, staring out the window for just a moment too long. Her laughter, once so full and warm, now carried an edge of fatigue. I didn't know what it meant then. I didn't know that even teachers, those pillars we lean on, carry their own hidden struggles. All I knew was that something in the steady foundation I had built my new life upon seemed to be shifting. And that scared me, because for the first time in years I had hope. I had someone who believed in me, had a path. And the thought of losing that terrified me more than I could put into words. Still, I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't my place. She was the teacher, I was the student. It wasn't my job to pry. But in the silence of those moments, in the cracks forming around her, the seeds of a coming storm were already being planted. A storm that would test not only her strength, but mine as well. And when it came, it would change everything. The shift was subtle at first. Ms. Carter, who had always been so present, so alive in every lesson, began to feel distant. Her once sharp eyes, the ones that always seemed to notice everything, now looked tired, clouded by something I couldn't quite name. First, I brushed it off. Teachers were human too. They had bad days, long weeks, and lives outside the classroom that we never saw. But the unease gnawed at me, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. She started missing small things. Assignments returned late. Feedback shorter than usual. She forgot the details she used to remember so well. Who liked writing, who struggled with reading, who needed extra encouragement. She still smiled, but it was thinner, more fragile. And sometimes in the middle of class, her voice would falter ever so slightly, as if her mind was far away. At first, I didn't think it had anything to do with me. After all, she was the teacher and I was just one of her students. But when you've built your fragile hope around someone, even the smallest shift feels like an earthquake. The change in her reflected back on me. I found myself slipping again. Homework went unfinished, my participation shrank, and the old doubts crept back in. Without her steady encouragement, I felt my confidence fading, as though I had only been borrowing her belief in me, and now it was being taken away. One afternoon after class I stayed behind, gathering my books slowly. Miss Carter was sitting at her desk, staring blankly at a stack of papers she hadn't touched. The silence stretched until I finally blurted out, "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled. For a moment her guard dropped, and I saw something raw in her eyes. Fear, sadness, maybe even exhaustion. But then she forced a small smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Just a little tired." It was the same lie I had told her months ago, the same mask I had worn. And hearing it from her shook me. In the following weeks, whispers began circulating among students. Some said she was dealing with personal problems. Others claimed she was thinking of leaving the school. The rumors swirled, and though I tried not to believe them, the tension in her face made it hard to ignore. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon. The air was heavy with the restless energy of students eager for the weekend. But when Miss Carter walked into class, she wasn't carrying her usual stack of books. Instead, she held a single folder. She set it down on her desk with a sigh that seemed to echo in my chest. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice low but steady. The class quieted instantly. "This will be my last semester here. After that, I'll be moving to another city." The words hit me like a blow. Around me, some students gasped, others whispered. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Leaving. She was leaving. She explained something about family obligations, about needing to be closer to her parents who were unwell. Her words blurred together in my ears. All I could focus on was the sudden emptiness that opened up inside me. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to beg her not to go. But I sat frozen in my chair, my throat tight, my mind spinning. She had been my anchor, my guide, the one who had pulled me from the shadows. And now she was slipping away. After class, I lingered until everyone else had gone. My legs felt heavy as I approached her desk. She looked up, her expression tired but gentle. "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice breaking more than I wanted it to. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I didn't want you to hear it from rumors. I wanted to tell you myself." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Why now? You've helped me so much. You believed in me when no one else did." Her eyes softened, and for a moment I thought she might change her mind, might tell me it was all a mistake. But she only reached out and placed a hand on mine. Sometimes life forces us to make choices we don't want to make. This doesn't erase what you've achieved. It doesn't erase what you've become. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "But what if I can't do it without you?" Her grip tightened slightly. "You can. You already are. Don't let my absence convince you otherwise." I wanted to believe her. I wanted those words to wrap around me like a shield. But deep inside, fear whispered that without her, I would fall back into the darkness. Over the weekend I spiraled. I couldn't focus on anything. The thought of her leaving haunted me. Every corner of the school that held memories of her guidance now felt like it was fading away. The essays she encouraged, the notes she wrote on my assignments, the way she said my name with confidence instead of dismissal, all of it threatened to vanish. And with that fear came anger. Why did she have to leave now? Just when I had started to believe in myself. Why couldn't she fight to stay the way she always told me to fight? Why was life so unfair, snatching away the one person who had finally seen me? That anger lit a fire in me, but it wasn't the kind that gave me strength. It burned recklessly, eating away at the fragile hope she had built inside me. By Monday, the whispers in school grew louder. Some students were indifferent, but others were openly upset. A few even blamed her, saying she had abandoned us. Their words echoed my own hidden thoughts, and the guilt of agreeing with them made me feel sick. When Ms. Carter entered the classroom that day, I couldn't meet her eyes. I avoided her questions, gave half-hearted answers, and when she offered encouragement, I turned away. It was easier to be angry than to admit how much it hurt. But she noticed. She always noticed. After class, she caught up with me in the hallway. "You're upset with me," she said gently. I clenched my fists. "What do you expect? You're just going to leave us." "Not leave you," she corrected softly. "I'm moving forward. And you will too." Her calmness only fueled my frustration. I wanted her to fight, to stay, to promise she wouldn't abandon me. But she didn't. She stood there, steady as ever, even as my world felt like it was breaking apart. And in that moment I realized the truth. The hardest part of growing wasn't learning to believe in myself with her guidance. It would be learning to believe without her. That realization was terrifying. But it also planted the seed of the biggest test I would ever face. The days after Ms. Carter's announcement stretched into a blur of confusion. Each class felt like a countdown. Every lesson was marked not just by what she taught, but by the ache of knowing there would be fewer and fewer of them. It was like watching the last sand slip through an hourglass, helpless to stop it. At first I tried to hold on tighter. I paid attention to every word, scribbled notes as if each sentence was a piece of wisdom I could lock away forever. I hung on her encouragement, memorized her expressions, and secretly replayed her advice in my head like an old recording. But the harder I clung to her presence, the more painful it became to realize that she was still slipping away. My grades began to fall again. Homework that once felt purposeful now seemed meaningless. Without her constant reassurance, every mistake felt like proof that I was never really capable in the first place. Teachers I didn't care about scolded me, classmates whispered, and the shame I thought I'd left behind crept back into my chest like an old enemy returning home. I kept hearing her voice telling me I could do it. But now, instead of comforting me, it felt like pressure. Pressure to live up to something I wasn't sure I could carry alone. One night, I stayed up staring at my unfinished assignments, the empty pages like mirrors reflecting my failure. My head dropped into my hands, and the old darkness pressed in again. The thought was sharp and cruel. Maybe I only mattered because she believed in me. Without her, I'm nothing. The next day, I avoided her eyes in class. I thought it would be easier, that if I pulled back first, it would hurt less when she was gone. But Miss Carter didn't let me disappear. She asked me questions directly, she reminded me of deadlines, and one afternoon she even stopped me at the door. "You're shutting me out," she said quietly, blocking my way. I stared at the floor. "You're leaving. What's the point of me depending on you anymore?" Her expression softened, but her voice was firm. Depending on me was never the point. The point was for you to learn to depend on yourself. Her words felt like a slap. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't strong enough, that I never would be. But the certainty in her eyes made the words stick in my throat. Instead, I stormed away. Anger bubbled inside me, but beneath it was fear. Raw, choking fear that maybe she was right. Over the next few weeks, the weight grew heavier. Some days I lashed out in small ways, skipping homework, giving curt answers in class, pretending not to care. Other days I drowned in quiet despair, staring blankly at my books while my mind filled with memories of how things used to be. Meanwhile, rumors about her leaving spread further. Some students started pulling away, treating her like she was already gone. Others clung to her more, desperate for attention before time ran out. I was caught somewhere in the middle, torn between anger and longing. Then one afternoon something shifted. I stayed behind after class again, books scattered across my desk. Miss Carter was gathering her things when she looked over and said, "You know, sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that force us to grow." I looked up, bitterness sharp in my chest. "Easy for you to say. You're the one walking away." She paused, setting her bag down, and walked closer. "Do you really think this is easy for me?" I didn't answer, but she went on, her voice softer now. "Leaving doesn't mean I stop caring. It means I trust you enough to take what you've learned and carry it forward. You think you're weak without me. But I've seen your strength, even when you refuse to see it yourself." Her words cracked something inside me. For weeks, I had been fighting to keep her from leaving, clinging to the idea that without her I would collapse. But what if she wasn't abandoning me? What if she was giving me the chance to stand on my own? That night I lay awake thinking about it. I thought about the first time she called on me in class, the way she encouraged my writing, the look of pride in her eyes when I finally handed in an essay I was proud of. None of those moments had come from her doing the work for me. They came from her pushing me, challenging me, making me dig deeper. Slowly, I began to realize something. Maybe her leaving wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of me finally testing everything she had taught me. But realizing it didn't make it easy. Over the next week I tried to change. I forced myself to complete assignments, even when the old voice in my head told me it wasn't worth it. I raised my hand in class, even when my heart raced. Some days I stumbled. Other days I succeeded. And through it all, Ms. Carter noticed. She didn't praise me as much as before. She didn't need to. Her small nods, her brief smiles, were enough to remind me that she saw me trying. One afternoon I stayed after class again, but this time I wasn't there to cling. I was there to show her something. An essay I had written, one I had poured my heart into. When she read it, her eyes softened. "This," she said, tapping the paper gently, "is what I knew you were capable of all along." Something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was proving it to her. I felt like I was proving it to myself. Still, the fear lingered. The semester was ending, and the reality of her leaving grew closer each day. Some nights, the panic returned, and I wondered if my fragile new strength would shatter the moment she was gone. But deep down, another thought had begun to take root. Maybe, just maybe, I could carry her lessons with me, even when she wasn't there to remind me. Maybe her leaving didn't erase what she had given me. It just forced me to hold it tighter. And though I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, part of me knew. The real test of everything she had taught me was only just beginning. The final weeks of the semester came faster than I expected. It was as if time had betrayed me, racing ahead while I struggled to hold on. Each day with Ms. Carter felt heavier, every class thick with the unspoken truth that she wouldn't be standing at the front of the room much longer. The closer we got to her departure, the more restless I became. I tried to stay strong, to apply her lessons and carry myself with the independence she said I had. But deep inside I was terrified. What if it was all temporary? What if I slipped back into the person I was before she found me? The boy drowning in silence, hiding behind excuses, never believing he mattered. And so the struggle inside me grew. On some days I felt like I could manage, like maybe I had absorbed enough of her guidance to survive without her. But on other days, the fear was suffocating. I caught myself staring at her during lessons, memorizing her voice, the way she wrote on the board, the calmness in her tone. I knew I was collecting fragments of her, like someone clinging to keepsakes before losing someone forever. One afternoon, she assigned us a reflective essay. Write about a person who changed your life and explain why. The instructions were simple, but when I sat at my desk later that night, my pen hovered uselessly over the paper. Of course I thought of her. But how could I possibly put into words what she had done for me? How could I confess that the thought of her leaving felt like losing the one person who saw me when no one else ever did? Instead, I stared at the blank page, paralyzed by the weight of my own feelings. The next day she asked for progress. Some students handed in drafts. I handed in nothing. After class she asked me to stay behind. "What's stopping you?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "I don't know how to say it." Her voice softened. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we most need to put into words." I wanted to tell her everything right then. That I was scared, that I felt abandoned, that I didn't know who I was without her. But my throat closed and instead I muttered, "It's just hard." She didn't press. She only said, "Try again. Don't let the silence win this time." Her words echoed in my head for days. I scribbled drafts, crossed them out, and started over. Nothing felt enough. And yet, a part of me knew the essay wasn't really about her. It was about me finding my voice. As the semester neared its end, the atmosphere in school shifted. The other students had started to move on, talking more about summer plans and new teachers. But for me, the shadow of her departure only grew darker. Then came the last week. Every day, I walked into her classroom knowing it might be the last time I'd hear her voice guiding us. Every assignment felt like a goodbye in disguise. And on the final Wednesday, something inside me cracked. She was lecturing, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind screamed with panic. This is it. This is the last time. After this, it's over. After this, she's gone. When the bell rang, I didn't leave with the others. My chest felt tight, my legs heavy. Finally, I blurted out, "I can't do this." She turned to me, surprised. "Can't do what?" "Say goodbye," I whispered. My voice trembled. "I can't watch you walk out and just pretend I'll be fine." Her expression softened into something between sadness and pride. She walked closer, lowering her voice. "It's not about pretending. It's about trusting yourself enough to know you'll keep going." My eyes burned. "What if I can't? What if I go back to who I was?" "You won't," she said firmly. "Because that boy doesn't exist anymore. You've outgrown him. And even if you stumble, it doesn't erase what you've become." Her certainty shook me. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to scream that she was wrong. "Then why does it feel like you're abandoning me?" asked, my voice breaking. Her eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Tears. She reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "Because growing feels like being abandoned sometimes. But I'm not leaving because I don't care. I'm leaving because I believe you can stand on your own." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment I hated them. And yet deep inside I knew they were true. The next day I forced myself to finish the essay. I wrote until my hand ached, pouring out the words I had been too afraid to say. I wrote about the first time she believed in me, about the way her encouragement had broken through years of silence. I wrote about how I was terrified of losing her, but how, because of her, I was beginning to see a version of myself worth fighting for. When I handed it in, my hands were trembling. She read it quietly, her lips pressed together, her eyes scanning every line. When she finished, she looked up at me, tears glistening. "You found the words," she whispered. For the first time I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because she approved, but because I had finally said the truth out loud. But the relief was bittersweet. Because the end was here. On the very last day, the classroom was quieter than usual. Students signed yearbooks, exchanged laughter, and talked about their futures. I sat silently, staring at the empty desk where she would no longer sit. When the final bell rang, she stood in front of us, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Remember this. Learning never ends. People may come and go in your life, but the lessons they leave behind stay with you forever. Carry them. Protect them. Let them guide you. Her eyes swept the room, and for a brief second they landed on me. It felt like her gaze held all the unspoken words between us. The fear, the gratitude, the pain, the hope. As the students filed out, I stayed behind once more. This time there was no anger left, only a raw ache. "Thank you," I said quietly. She smiled, her eyes wet. "No, thank you. For letting me be part of your journey." And then she walked away. I stood frozen, listening to her footsteps fade, knowing this was the moment I had dreaded. She was gone. And now the real test would begin. When Miss Carter walked out of the classroom for the last time, it felt as if the air itself had changed. The walls seemed emptier, the desks colder, the whole school quieter in a way that made me uneasy. I carried her goodbye with me like a stone in my chest, heavy and unshakable. The first week without her was the hardest. Every morning, I expected to hear her voice in the hallway, brisk and full of purpose. Every class, I caught myself glancing at her desk, only to find it occupied by someone else, a substitute teacher with none of her fire, none of her warmth. The absence wasn't just noticeable, it was unbearable. And almost immediately, the old fears returned. My assignments piled up, and without her steady encouragement, I began to procrastinate. Tests loomed ahead, and I heard that familiar poisonous whisper in my head. "You can't do this. You were only ever good because of her." At night, I sat at my desk with textbooks open but unread, my pen hovering over blank pages. The memory of her voice telling me I was capable fought against the louder voice inside me insisting I wasn't. It was a war between who I had been and who I was trying to become. One Friday, the new teacher announced a major exam. It wasn't just any test. It would count for a large part of our grade, the kind of thing Ms. Carter would have prepared us for with weeks of guidance. But she wasn't here. And the panic clawed at my throat. I considered skipping the exam altogether. Part of me thought it would be easier to fail quietly than to try and confirm what I feared, that without her, I wasn't strong enough. But then I remembered the essay I had written. I remembered her words when she said, "You found the words." That essay had been mine, not hers. My truth, my effort, my voice. And slowly, I realized the same was true of this exam. If I passed, it would be mine. If I failed, it would also be mine. Either way, the result would belong to me, not to her shadow. So I forced myself to study. Not perfectly, not without distraction, but with persistence. I set goals, small ones at first. One chapter, then a break, then another chapter. I stayed up late, scribbling notes, reminding myself of her steady belief in me. And though it wasn't easy, something inside me felt different. When the day of the exam arrived, my hands trembled as I picked up my pen. The paper looked impossibly long, the questions designed to expose every weakness I had. My instinct was to panic, to shut down, to give in. But then I heard her voice in my memory. "Don't let the silence win this time." I took a deep breath and began writing. The first questions were rough. My answers felt shaky, uncertain. But as I kept going, I found rhythm. I leaned on the techniques she had taught us, outlining ideas before writing, breaking problems into smaller steps, not giving up when the first attempt failed. Hours passed in a blur of scribbled answers and racing thoughts. And when I handed in the paper, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt drained, hollow, unsure if I had done enough. The weekend that followed was torture. Every time I thought about the exam, my stomach twisted. I doubted myself endlessly, replaying questions in my head, imagining the red ink of failure covering my work. Finally, Monday came. The teacher walked into class holding a stack of graded exams. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my chest. When my paper landed on my desk, I stared at it for what felt like hours before I dared to look. And then I saw it. A grade higher than I had ever received before. Not perfect, but strong. Strong enough to prove something I had been too afraid to believe. I had done it. My own. The relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. For the first time, I realized Ms. Carter had been right. I wasn't just her student, surviving because of her encouragement. I was capable because I had worked, because I had tried, because deep down the strength was already mine. But the victory wasn't without weight. As I sat there staring at the paper, I wished she were there to see it. I wished I could run to her desk, hand it to her, and hear her say she was proud. Instead, I sat quietly, holding back tears, knowing she would never know the result. That night, I walked home under a sky heavy with stars. My exam paper was tucked into my bag, proof of the first real step I had taken without her. And though the ache of her absence was still sharp, something new stirred inside me, something that felt like hope. Yet, even as I clung to that hope, I knew the battle wasn't over. The exam was only one challenge. There would be harder tests, deeper struggles, and darker nights where her absence would hurt all over again. But now, for the first time, I thought, maybe I can survive them. Maybe I can even grow from them. And though the road ahead looked uncertain, one truth rang clear in my heart. This was no longer just her story. It was mine. The glow of passing that first exam carried me for a while. It was like a spark I kept tucked inside, proof that I could survive without Ms. Carter's constant presence. But sparks don't last forever, and soon enough, the shadows began to creep back in. The school year was winding down, and everyone was talking about final projects. These weren't just ordinary assignments. They were the kind that demanded creativity, independence, and confidence. They were also the kind of tasks that once terrified me. In the past, I would have leaned on Ms. Carter for guidance. She would have helped me find direction, encouraged me when I doubted myself, and reminded me that I had something valuable to say. But now she wasn't here. The project was simple on the surface. Present a story that reflects who you are. For most students, it was exciting, a chance to show off. For me, it felt like a trap. Who was I really? What story could I tell? For nights, I sat staring at blank pages, just as I had when I tried to write the essay about her. Every idea I jotted down felt weak, empty, or worse, dishonest. I considered skipping the project altogether, but I knew the consequences. It wasn't just about a grade. It was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own. So I decided to do the hardest thing, tell the truth. I would present my story, the real one. The story of a boy who had been invisible, who had struggled in silence, who had nearly lost himself. The story of how one teacher's belief had cracked open that darkness, letting in light. And the story of how, even after she was gone, that light continued to burn. The decision terrified me. Sharing that kind of truth wasn't like answering questions on an exam. It was opening a wound in front of people who might not care, who might laugh, who might dismiss it. But something in me knew it was the only way. I spent days preparing, scribbling drafts, practicing aloud in my empty room. Each time I rehearsed, I stumbled over words, my voice catching when I spoke her name. But slowly I grew steadier. Slowly, I began to hear my own voice not as weak or broken, but as something real. The night before the presentation, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining every possible failure. My heart pounded with the old fear. What if they don't listen? What if I embarrass myself? What if I prove I was never strong enough? And then, like a whisper from memory, I heard her voice again. Don't let the silence win this time. The next morning, when my name was called, my legs shook as I stood. I carried my notes in trembling hands, but when I looked at the class, I saw only a blur of faces. For a moment I froze. Then I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and began. I told them about the boy I had been, the one who hid behind excuses, who felt invisible, who believed he was worthless. I spoke of the nights spent staring at unfinished assignments, convinced I couldn't succeed. And then, with my throat tight, I spoke of Ms. Carter. I told them how she had seen me when no one else did, how she had pulled me out of the shadows and reminded me that my voice mattered. I didn't hide the pain of her leaving, or the fear of being on my own. I confessed that I had doubted myself, that I still doubted myself. But then I told them about the exam, about how, even without her, I had fought through the fear and proved I could succeed. And I ended with the truth that had been the hardest to say. She changed my life, but now it's my responsibility to keep going. And I will. When I finished, the room was silent. For a moment, the silence felt crushing, like the old silence that had once swallowed me whole. But then, slowly, students began to clap. Not politely, but sincerely. Some even stood. I felt heat rush to my face, not from embarrassment, but from something else, something like pride. For the first time I had spoken my truth out loud, not in an essay, not in whispers, but boldly in front of everyone. After class, a few students came up to me. One said, "That was brave." Another whispered, "I know what it feels like." Their words reminded me that my story wasn't just mine. It was something others could connect to. Walking home that day, I carried no paper, no grade, no tangible proof. But inside, I carried something far more valuable. The realization that my voice could stand on its own. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out the old essay I had written about Ms. Carter. I read it again, but this time I didn't feel sadness. Felt gratitude. Her presence had been the beginning, but her absence had become the test, and I was passing it step by step. Still as strong as I felt, I knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more trials, more nights of doubt, more moments where I wished she was there to guide me. But I also knew something else. Every lesson she gave me, every encouragement, every challenge, was still with me. And as long as I carried those lessons, I was never truly alone. The applause from that classroom stayed with me for days, echoing in my chest like a heartbeat. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you're safe. And my real test came sooner than I expected. Final exams loomed ahead. They weren't just tests of memory or skill. For me, they were the true measure of whether I had really grown, or whether everything I believed after that presentation was just another illusion. I remembered last year when I had failed. I remembered the shame, the whispers, the sinking feeling that I would never be good enough. And now, with Ms. Carter gone, that fear came back, heavier than ever. The night before the first exam, I sat at my desk with books spread out, pages filled with highlighted notes. My body was tense, my hands clammy. No matter how much I studied, my mind whispered the same poisonous doubts. What if you fail again? What if you prove everyone right? What if you were never strong, only carried by her belief? I pushed the thoughts away, repeating the mantra she had once drilled into me. Preparation is power. Fear is a liar. The next morning I walked into the exam hall. The air was thick with tension, the scratch of pencils, the shuffle of papers. I sat at my desk, heart racing, palms pressed to the wooden surface as if steadying myself against a storm. When the paper landed in front of me, I froze. The first question looked like it was written in another language. My chest tightened. I felt that familiar wave, the one that told me to give up, to surrender, to accept failure. But then, in that chaos, her face flashed in my memory, not as a savior but as a challenger. I heard her voice. Breathe, one step at a time. Don't run from it, fight it. I inhaled, exhaled, and forced myself to focus. Word by word, problem by problem, I began. Hours passed like minutes. When the final bell rang, I dropped my pen, exhausted but alive. I had finished. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. I walked out into the sunlight with a weight lifted. But the real climax wasn't just the exams. It was what happened after. 2 weeks later, results were posted. Students crowded around the board, voices rising in excitement or groans of disappointment. I hung back, afraid to look. My hands trembled as I pushed through the crowd and scanned the list. And then, I saw it. Name. My grades. Not just passing. Strong. Respectable. The kind of grades I had once thought impossible. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as tears stung my eyes. The noise of the hallway faded, and all I could think was, I did it. I really did it. And yet, in that triumph there was an ache. I wanted so badly to run to Ms. Carter, to tell her, to see that proud smile on her face. But she wasn't there. So instead I whispered to myself, this is for you. The final days of school were bittersweet. I was no longer the invisible student who hid in silence. I had found my voice, faced my fears, and earned something no grade could measure: belief in myself. On the very last day, as I packed up my locker, I found something wedged at the back, a folded note, yellowed at the edges. My hands shook as I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was from Ms. Carter. I didn't even remember putting it there. The note was simple, written in her neat handwriting. You don't need me forever. One day, you'll see that the strength was always yours. When that day comes, don't doubt it. Live it. Reading those words, I felt everything. The pain, the gratitude, the transformation, collide in my chest. And I realized something important. This wasn't the end of her influence. It was the continuation of it. Her lessons didn't end when she left. They lived in me, in every choice I made, in every step forward. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in golden fire, I walked home with my head high. Not because I had perfect grades, not because I was suddenly fearless, but because I had changed. The boy who once hid behind silence was gone. In his place was someone stronger, scarred but standing, fragile yet determined. And though Miss Carter wasn't there to see it, I knew she would have been proud. The climax of my story wasn't passing exams or giving speeches. It was something deeper. It was realizing that even after losing the person who believed in me the most, I could still carry that belief within myself. That was the true change. That was the victory. Time has a strange way of softening memories while sharpening lessons. Looking back now, years after those classrooms, those exams, and those silent battles with myself, I realized something profound. Miss Carter didn't just change my grades or my confidence or even my future. She changed the way I understood life itself. In the weeks that followed graduation, life didn't suddenly become easy. There were still long nights of worry, moments where doubt crept back in, and struggles that had nothing to do with school. But every time I faced one of those moments, I heard her voice, not as a ghost, not as an echo, but as a steady reminder. Don't let the silence win. Don't let fear take the first move. It became more than advice. It became a compass. In college, when assignments felt overwhelming, I remembered the night I faced that blank page and decided to write the truth. In job interviews, when my voice threatened to shake, I remembered standing in front of my class, telling my story out loud. When I faced rejection, I remembered the day I saw my name on that results board and knew that failure wasn't permanent. And in each of those moments, I understood that she hadn't been building me up so I could lean on her forever. She had been teaching me how to lean on myself. But what moved me most was the way her lessons rippled outward. One day, in my second year of college, I was tutoring younger students at the library. A boy came in, quiet, eyes down, carrying the same weight I once carried. He said he wasn't smart, that he always failed, that nobody believed in him. Hearing those words, I felt like I was staring into a mirror of my past. I sat with him not just as a tutor but as someone who understood. And for the first time, I found myself repeating the same words that had once saved me. You're not invisible. Your voice matters. You just have to give it a chance. The boy looked up at me with wide eyes, and I realized the circle had come full. Ms. Carter had given me the courage to believe in myself. And now, without even planning it, I was passing that courage on. That's when it truly hit me. She hadn't just changed my life. She had started a chain reaction. And maybe one day, that boy would carry the same lessons forward, giving hope to someone else. Years later, when I graduated college, I stood on the stage in my cap and gown, looking out at the crowd. My family was there cheering. My friends waved. But in my heart, I felt her presence too. I imagined her smile, proud but not surprised, because she had seen this in me long before I had. Life continued, jobs, challenges, victories, and setbacks. But no matter how far I traveled, no matter what I achieved, I never forgot where it all began. In that classroom, with a teacher who chose to see a broken student not as a burden, but as a possibility. And now, whenever I look back, I don't just see the pain of those years. I see the beauty too. Because sometimes, the hardest struggles become the clearest turning points. Sometimes the people we lose leave us with the strength we didn't know we had. It's strange. I used to think my story was about her, about the teacher who saved me. But now I see it differently. My story is about me, about the student who learned to save himself, because one teacher cared enough to show him how. I carry her lessons not as chains to the past, but as wings for the future. And even though I'll never be able to thank her enough, I know that every time I face fear and choose courage, every time I help someone who feels invisible, every time I refuse to let silence win, I am honoring her. And in that way, she is still here. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the people who shaped your journey. Sometimes it only takes one teacher, one friend, or one kind soul to change everything. If you've ever had someone who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you want more emotional English stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay with us for the next chapter.